Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now, back in 2013, Games Workshop would finally end support for their specialist games line. So games like Mordheim, Battlefleet Gothic, and the older run of Necromunda were finally put out to pasture, and they stopped producing the rules and miniatures. Now, what happened as part of that is that they actually released all of those rule sets as PDFs for free, as sort of a last hurrah, a thank you to everybody who'd been involved, and a last opportunity for people to grab them. And this means that a ton of PDFs of perfectly playable games are out there to go and download for free. Might take a little bit of digging, but it's often not too hard to find. You'll often find that there are also expansions, and sort of tidy up versions such as Epic 40K's Net Epic, or Battlefleet Gothic Expanded and Revised, and I haven't actually gone looking for a Mordheim version, so I'm going to have to do that after I finish editing this. Now, today's miniature is a 3D print from Heresy Lab over at My Mini Factory, which I've done because I really like the look of these. Now, the important thing isn't so much the miniature itself as, well, there are a ton of alternatives out there for Sisters of Sigmar and anything else which you might want to play in Mordheim. Whether you're using third parties or conversions, there's nothing which is going to stop you from playing these games if you want to. And most importantly, because they aren't officially supported anymore, you can use whatever you like. So today, I've turned to a resin print, and tomorrow I might try something different. I know that the Hassle-Free line has some pretty cool miniatures. Anyhow, enough of my rambling. All of the paints will be listed in the description below, so let's get started. So, to nobody's great surprise, I've started by priming her with Wraithbone. You could go lighter and start from white, but Wraithbone's going to give us that little bit of peachiness under most of these colours, which is going to make them look a little better, I think. We will shade this later, but this is the place to start, I think. Now, looking at the miniature, you want to get an idea for what is the lowest part. So, closest to her skin, what is she wearing? And then her skin, which is the lowest layer. And when painting with contrast, you want to start from as low as possible and build up, same as you would with most paints. So I have here Guilliman Flesh, and on a smaller area like her face, I actually quite like using the glaze brush for this. When it comes to areas like her arms and such, I will swap on to probably a medium layer brush. But just a quick coat of this, and we'll be away laughing. Now, once it's had about 5 minutes to dry, you'll see that it settles rather nicely, particularly on her hands and arms. That is the easiest way of painting skin that I've ever come across. Now, we're going to move up to the next item that she's wearing, which is going to be this tabard thing she's got in the front there. Now, the Sisters of Sigmar never seem to be wearing very much in the way of colour, but I do want to add a little bit of red here. So I have Flesh Terror's red. Now this is really grim. This is a proper dark, and probably in keeping with its namesake, quite a meaty red. So take your time here, and oops. Oh geez, I'm making a pig's ear of this. If there is a shortcoming to the contrast line, I'll tell you, it is the fact you do need to be quite careful in how you apply it. So all of this talk of one quick coat, I don't know that that's wholly accurate. But it is quicker than having to come back and shade and tidy up and all that sort of carry on, so maybe there's something to it. Now you'll see here on her front where she's got this little golden medallion. Because I am going to touch that up with a base paint later, I'm not worried about hitting it. But things like the straps and such, I really want to try and avoid. What we'll move on to now is this leather thing she's wearing, and I am using Snakebite Leather. Although mine was one of the very early pots that has Ultramarines Blue written on it, so I always get a little cheap thrill out of getting it out. So a little bit of this onto the leather details, and I'm also going to paint in the straps, a couple of the straps on her arms with this. Same thing as always, take your brush slowly to the edge of detail, run it along so you get that nice little bit of contrast in the recess there. And then you can fill out the rest. Now, interestingly enough, I've always found it easier to run over areas a little bit and tidy them up later, because if you end up leaving any of the primer showing through, you're going to get this glow. So it is actually better to have a slight splash in the wrong place than to miss it entirely. So just a bit of a thought there. Before I do paint her skirt though, there are these little areas that I want to tidy up, so I am going back to Wraithbone for this. And this will also be an opportunity to tidy up some of the cables, straps and what have you. Now that cleanup doesn't take very long, and it does still surprise me that, honestly, it's still a bit quicker painting using the contrast method than traditionally. It always shocks me, which is funny. What we're going to move on to now, though, is this skirt. And here's where I want to talk about one of the things that is missing from the contrast range, and that is a nice middle brown. Snakebite Leather is about the right kind of intensity, but it's the wrong color. It's too yellow. I want something more like Mournfang brown, and contrast just doesn't have it. So what we're going to have to do is mix it some. So grab yourself a nice cheap plastic palette. This one cost me €1, and though I haven't used it yet, I'm going to bash this one to pieces, to be honest. Grab yourself some contrast medium, and I'm going to use my shade brush to get this out. And I want 1, 2, 3, let's get 4 dollops of this. $5. And then we're going to get some Wyldwood. Now I suggest getting at your medium first, because we're going to be dipping into a paint pot here. So you're less likely to get anything into your medium. Now I've got 4 big dollops of that. Half and half would be fine as well. I'm just experimenting a little bit here. And then we'll mix this together nice and quick. I just realized I haven't been recording for all of that, so I've switched to my regiment's brush, or medium layer brush, and I am just going to apply this over all of the dress. Now when it comes to big areas like on the side here, I had quite a bit of it sort of collect, and that was not looking good. So what I'm going to do is drag it away while it's wet. And I tend to find that using a little of the medium actually gives you more time to work with the contrast. So even if you aren't deliberately thinning it out as we have here, it's a good practice if you've got a big flat area that you want to work with. Now that's not quite dry, but that is looking far more subtle than I thought it would. I'm fairly happy with that. Once we shade that, that's going to look a little better too. We'll move on now. I have Gore-Grunta Fur, and this is a really nice sort of warm red leather kind of color. So I'm going to use this for the belts around her waist, and I'll also do the wrist straps in this too. Now once again, across her chest, I've made sure that the strap, which is holding on the shoulder pad here, has also been painted. Still not worried about that little icon there. And with a fine brush, I got in and did the handle on her hammer, rather. Goodness me. Can't tell the difference between an axe and a hammer. Anyhow, when it comes to her hair, there's not really a correct color. So I'm going to use skeleton bone, and I'm going to apply this quite quickly over all of the hair. We'll turn now to some metallics. I have here Iron Hand Steel. Now, some will insist on sticking purely to contrast, in which case you could use Griff Charger Grey or Basilicanum Grey. I really think a little bit of metallic is not going to hurt at all here. So let's just apply this straight over her hammer. And I'm going to get a smaller brush, and I will do the chain on the icon around her neck with this as well. You'll see this covers very well. So once it's dry, we can move straight on. And then just a wee bit of Retributor Armour, and we'll dot in this little icon on her chain here. And for our final stage before shading, I've gone back to Wraithbone again. I really want to make sure that these dangly strips, I don't know what these would be called, it doesn't really matter. I want to make sure that they are clean and almost white for when we get to our shading. Now once we've finished our Wraithbone cleanup, it's time to turn to our shade. Now if you've watched me use contrast before, ordinarily I use a pre-shade over the primer, then dry brush white or something similar, and then apply the contrast. So what's it going to do differently this time? In short, it's going to dull down the colors a little bit more, and it will look a bit more as though we've painted it using normal paints. In honesty, I'm doing it because I want to. I just want to see what's going to happen. And I think this is part of the difference in painting for yourself. You know, we're very results oriented, and I think just enjoying the process is something that gets put by the wayside sometimes. So I'm going to have some fun here. We're going to experiment, see what happens. Out comes the Agrax Earthshade, and we are going to apply this over, oh yes, okay, over the whole miniature. Again, same as always, you don't want to let it pool too much in areas where you like the color as it is. But as you can see, this is going to pull together some of these colors, dull them down a little bit, and introduce just a wee bit more shading in some spots. So let's go over the whole thing, and then as always, we'll give her about half an hour to dry. Now, it always surprises me how much of a difference Agrax Earthshade makes, even over contrast. That's come out pretty well. Not that she looked, terrible before, but that's quite happy with that, to be honest. What we'll do now is just a couple of highlights to really make it shine a bit more than it is already. But I'm actually going to start not with a highlight, but with one last color on her face, because that tongue is bugging me. So I've got a tiny wee bit here of Volupus Pink, and I'm going to very carefully just blip that on her tongue. We're then going to turn to Flayed One Flesh, and we're going to highlight some of her skin. Just a couple of little areas like the tip of her nose. Ordinarily I would paint in her eyebrows, but those are sculpted on, so I'm not going to. But just a few little details here and there. This will make her seem quite pale at the moment, but we're going to fix this up in just a second. Now, I might have overdone that, but I've got here a little bit of Reikland Fleshshade, and I'm just going to put a wee bit of this back over all of that skin. Now, in retrospect, I should probably just have left her skin the way it was. That probably would have looked better, but oh well. I've got a little Squig Orange, and I'm going to do just a little bit to the front of this red tabard. Now, I've just had a cunning idea, something that I will actually have to try off camera, I'm afraid. But I've got here some black Templar and a wee tiny brush. What I'm going to do is paint in the socket of her eye using this, and we'll see what happens. Alright, that was hair-raising. I'm not going to push my luck and do that any further. I think that's going to define the eyes quite enough. I have now some white scar, and I'm going to do just a little bit along the edges of this, these dangly bits. I'm sure they've got a name. But I'm also going to do in her teeth at the same time. Now, if you make any little mistakes where you sort of go over the edge of where you'd like your highlight to be, just work a little bit of Agrax Earthshade into that gap. Not a problem. Nobody saw a thing. Now from here, of course, you could do plenty more. You could highlight her skirt or the bits of leather around her wrist, whatever you want to do. But I really just wanted to paint something and have some fun. And I think for something I'm going to pop on the table once or twice and just have a laugh with, this is plenty. So what I'm going to do now is to just go ahead, pop a matte varnish on her, and do her base. Have a look at what she looks like when she is all finished. And there we have it. At last, our Acolyte is complete. Now, ordinarily, this is the point of the video where I would say, "Ooh, I really enjoyed how that turned out," or something along those lines. And this time, instead, what I've got at the end is the sensation that I know what I would do differently next time. And that's something which I think is actually a really useful, if not a skill, a perspective to try and keep hold of yourselves. I get questions quite often from people talking about when something has gone wrong, how do they fix it? And I don't know that in this case there is a single answer, or in any case really, because whenever you've got paint on your brush and you're moving it around, you are learning something. And I certainly learned a few things while painting this, particularly in those experiments that didn't quite turn out the way that I would have liked. So instead of being disheartened by it not being what I wanted it to be, instead, well, she'll look fine on the table. And it's not as if, having finished her, I'm now finished painting miniatures forever. There's always another one, and another. So I can iterate that knowledge. I've learned something today, and that's what I'm going to take away from it, instead of being bummed out that it's just not quite what I wanted. And she's also going to stop moving. So whether you have access to a 3D printer or you're looking at third-party miniatures for the options that are available these days, I think there's some real value in going back to these old specialist games and just having some fun. In particular with Mordheim, there are still the Skaven range, for example. There's still plenty of the old Empire range which work for human mercenaries, and it's not difficult to find other alternatives. So I'll drop a couple of examples in the description below, and you can go and check those out. Now, some of the specialist games have dated a little bit by design, compared to what would be made today, but I think in some ways that's part of its charm. So give it a shot, have a read, it's easy to find, and see whether or not you like the look. So as always, thank you very much to Exit23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of the patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my producers, Alan Nuttall, Kyrie Crawford, Trainboy, Fred, and Jimmy. Your support really is invaluable. Any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comments box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.